Cincinnati veterans report for training camp on July 25th at Paul Brown Stadium in Cincinnati as the Bengals prepare to avoid a third consecutive losing season for the first time since 2002. We'll take a look at all the new faces, including 11 draft picks, the updated depth chart, and more, as we preview training camp for the Cincinnati Bengals by going one-on-one with Dan Hoard, radio play-by-play voice for the Bengals on the OFN Meeting Room with Greg DePalma. Wednesday, July 11th, 2018. I'm Greg DePalma. Thanks for tuning into the OFN Meeting Room as we continue to preview NFL training camps for the 2018 season. And our first today, and that's with Cincinnati Bengals radio play-by-play voice, Dan Hoard. Dan, thanks for helping us talk Cincinnati Bengals football today.
Greg, camp is 15 days away. I'm ready to talk Bengals football.
Yeah, it's exciting, isn't it? Especially, it all depends. If you're a big baseball fan, then I guess you can wait a little bit longer. But, I'm a baseball fan. I know you are. You've done a lot of work in baseball. We'll get into that in just a second. But still, football's football, and when training camp hits, it's very exciting.
It is. I have room for both in my heart, and the Cincinnati Reds are hot right now, so that's exciting. But I am definitely looking forward to training camp, and hopefully, as you mentioned at the top, a turnaround for the Bengals after back-to-back losing seasons.
Yeah, I was going through the roster and the depth chart as I do before every interview, and I was very impressed with what I've seen. So I'm very excited to find out more about your take on this. First off, though, as I mentioned, it has been a couple of years of not going to the postseason. The Bengals had a really incredible run for this franchise. And Marvin Lewis, 0-7 in the playoffs, even though he's got 4 division titles. They've only finished in last place once under his leadership. That was 2010. Everybody talks about the negatives about Marvin Lewis. I want to know what the positives are. Why, when the Bengals decided to bring Marvin Lewis back, what were the good reasons that they decided that he needed to be on the sidelines?
Well, the biggest reason why the team retained Marvin Lewis is because Mike Brown, the owner, and Marvin, the head coach, are as close as any owner-head coach combination in the NFL. They've had a great relationship throughout Marvin's tenure, and I think Mike Brown is very reluctant to let him go, despite the lack of a playoff win and despite the consecutive losing seasons. Critics see a coach who hasn't won a playoff game. His boss, Mike Brown, sees a coach that's gone to the playoffs 5 of the last 7 years. And I think in Mike Brown's opinion, the Bengals are closer to getting back to the playoffs and, again, hopefully winning a playoff game by keeping Marvin than by blowing things up and starting over. So we'll see if it works. Back in 2010, everybody was calling for Marvin's head. Mike Brown elected to stick with Marvin. It was not a popular decision at the time. It resulted in the loss of season ticket holders. And after that decision, the Bengals went on a run of 5 straight playoff appearances. So I'm not predicting that's going to happen again, but I would not be the least bit surprised if the Bengals do have a surge over the next couple of years.
All right, yeah, and taking a look at the players on this team right now, I could definitely see that as well. Talk about how they've been built, because I got to believe Duke Tobin might be the most underrated player personnel / scout / GM, whatever role you want to give him, as far as building a team and putting talent together, especially with what he has to deal with. He's not in the major market, the big organization everybody wants to go to. He hasn't had a Tom Brady, a quarterback, or Bill Belichick as a head coach, but he's been able to put together a heck of a team over the years. How much credit should he be getting that he's not getting nationally?
He should get a ton of credit. His title is Director of Player Personnel, as you mentioned, but he has many of the responsibilities of a GM at any other organization, and he has done a tremendous job in the draft. The Bengals have basically followed the Green Bay Packers model, or at least they've tried to, building through the draft. They rarely go out and sign free agents. I'll take that back. They sign free agents, but they typically tend to go for bargain-type free agents. They don't go for the big, huge splash signing of a free agent.
Sure.
And by doing that, they have built a team that has been able to compete for playoff spots almost every year in what I think has consistently been the most competitive division in football. That wasn't the case last year as the Steelers dominated. But if you go back over the last 10 or 15 years, the trio of Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, and Baltimore has been as tough as any threesome in the NFL. So Duke Tobin deserves a ton of the credit for that. He has turned down the opportunity to interview for GM jobs in other markets, which I think has benefited Cincinnati, and hopefully he sticks around for a long time because he is a very sharp guy.
All right, now let's take a look at some of those impact moves as we go through the roster. And, of course, as I mentioned, too, at the top 11 draft picks. Are you surprised that they held on to all 11? When you hold on to all 11, there's usually a few reasons for that. What do you think the specific reason was to hold on to 11 as opposed to trading away some picks and moving up? Apparently, depth was more important this year.
Well, they did make some moves regarding their draft picks. They made a trade with Buffalo, moving down in the first round. They had the 12th pick after going 7-9 last year. They moved down to 21 and picked up Cordy Glenn as part of that deal. Later in the draft, they made a move that allowed them to get an extra pick late in the draft. So they were making some moves in the draft. When you take 11 picks, chances are they're not all going to be able to make it. Some will wind up on the practice squad. Well, some will wind up on the 53. But I think the Bengals thought it was a deep draft, particularly in the later rounds, and they wanted as many players as they could possibly get to throw against the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah, a lot of good talent. Even anytime you get into the 7th round, it's a crapshoot. But all of those picks, all those players added on from rounds 1 through 5, very interesting players we'll get into. Let's start. First of all, on offense, I do want to ask you about the coaching situation there. Bill Lazor, first-year coordinator last year. Again, it wasn't a very good season. How do you think he did, and any particular changes, philosophy, anything like that regarding his second season?
Yes. He was not the coordinator to begin last season. He took over in week 3 after they fired Ken Zampese when the Bengals failed to score a touchdown in the first 2 weeks of the season. So that's a difficult situation to be put in. He was trying to call plays basically with somebody else's offense. You can't completely change the system in week 3 of the regular season. And the Bengals' offense was much better once he started calling the plays than it was in the first couple of weeks. Having said that, the biggest problem that Bill Lazor had, and really even Ken Zampese before that, is the play of the offensive line. The Bengals' offensive line has really struggled for the last couple of years. They took major steps to fix it this year by trading for Cordy Glenn to play left tackle, drafting Billy Price, who will start at center in the first round out of Ohio State, and perhaps most importantly, hiring Frank Pollock away from the Dallas Cowboys. He's the new offensive line coach in Cincinnati. He was the Cowboys' offensive line coach for the last several years, and we know how good Dallas has been up front. So the Bengals are hoping they can get similar production now that they have Frank Pollock coaching things on the O-line.
All right. Taking a look at the offensive line, we might as well start there. You mentioned Glenn takes over at left tackle. Price will be the starting center, taking over for Bodine. Talk about the rest of the line. Jake Fisher, he is right now penciled in at right tackle. Has he been one of the disappointments? Is that something where definitely you take a look at the new coaching staff, or at least Pollock, as you mentioned, that's going to be one of his priorities to see if he can get Jake Fisher to step up?
Well, yes, that's true, but I would not pencil him in as a lock at right tackle. Jake has had injury issues. He had a heart issue last year and missed most of the season. So the Bengals are basically set at left tackle with Glenn, left guard with Clint Bowling, who's been a solid, if not great, NFL player at left guard, Billy Price at center, and then they still have battles going on at right guard and right tackle. It's a three-way battle at right guard between Trey Hopkins, who started most of last year, Christian Westerman, who started at the end of the year when Hopkins got hurt, and Alex Redmond, who played a little bit at the end of the year and did well. And then at right tackle, you've got Fisher, you've got Cedric Ogbuehi, who flopped at left tackle, but they're hoping that maybe Frank Pollock can bring the best out of him. And then Bobby Hart, a free agent that they signed away from the New York Giants. So 3 guys competing for a spot at right guard, 3 guys competing for a spot at right tackle. And they hope with Frank Pollock coaching, they'll be able to get at least average to slightly above average on the right side of the line.
All right, let's take a look at the skill position players. And, of course, Andy Dalton did not have a big season last season. A.J. McCarron was let go. I should ask you about McCarron. Because McCarron came in for Dalton, had that, even though they didn't win that playoff game, he seemed to play pretty well, not a lot of experience, never had a shot really to compete for the first string job. This has been Andy Dalton's team. Are you surprised by that at all? And if A.J. McCarron is successful in Buffalo, will that surprise you?
I think A.J. McCarron will do reasonably well in Buffalo. Unfortunately, he goes into a situation where they drafted a quarterback in the first round who's going to get the job as soon as A.J. McCarron falters. So I think he'll do okay. I just don't know how long he'll have the opportunity to start in Buffalo.
Okay.
In terms of his opportunities in Cincinnati, he did pretty well when Andy Dalton got injured at the end of the 2015 season. But keep in mind that year, when Andy Dalton got hurt, the Bengals were 10-2. They were the number one seed in the AFC playoff race at the time. He was being talked about as a possible MVP candidate. He breaks his thumb against the Steelers with a 10-2 record, and even though A.J. McCarron kept them playing pretty well and gave them a chance to win that playoff game against the Steelers, they still averaged 7 fewer points a game when he took over than they did under Andy Dalton. So, you know, Andy's been maligned for his postseason failures, and we all understand that. Until he succeeds in a playoff game, he's always going to have that monkey on his back. Mm-hmm. But by and large, 5 playoff appearances in 7 years in Cincinnati, when he took over a team that had been 4-12 the year before he got there, I think he's done pretty well.
Yeah, and you would think, of course, with that offensive line, if they can improve that aspect of the offense, that's going to help him out tremendously. Barkley, the backup, is that how it's going to work, and will they carry a third quarterback?
Well, there's a 3-way battle to be the backup. You've got Jeff Driscoll back. He was the number 3 quarterback last year behind Dalton and McCarron, so he is back. They brought in Matt Barkley as a free agent. He's got familiarity with Bill Lazor. When Barkley was a rookie in Philadelphia years ago, Bill Lazor was the quarterback's coach, so they know each other. And then they drafted a quarterback in the 7th round out of the University of Toledo, Logan Woodside. So they've got 3 guys battling for the backup spot. I think ideally they would like to have 2 quarterbacks on the active roster and another guy on the practice squad.
Okay.
So I think that's the likely way that they'll go, but they've kept 3 over the past couple of years, so we'll see.
All right. Bernard, Mixon, those are going to be the 2 guys now with Hill gone. There's a Brian Hill, of course, that also moves into the roster last year. And you take a look at some very interesting rookies, Mark Walton, and then 2 rookie free agents in Lowry and Quentin Flowers, the former quarterback at USF. So are those guys, I mean, Walton looks like his job, of course, is going to be solidified, but what do you think about the depth in this unit? Because it looks pretty strong. There's a lot of talent there.
No question about it. Joe Mixon becomes the number 1 running back full-time this year. Giovanni Bernard is the 3rd down receiving type option out of the backfield, and he'll probably get a significant number of carries as well. I think Mark Walton is just about a lock to be on the roster, not only for his potential to help as a number 3 running back, but he was a big special teams guy at the University of Miami.
Yep. And
he will definitely fill that type role with the Bengals. Historically, they've kept 3 running backs on the 53-man roster, plus a fullback who would be Ryan Hewitt.
Okay.
You never know if they might tweak that, but that has typically been the formula, and that is what I would expect.
All right. And as far as those young kids, has anybody impressed you yet from what you've heard or what you've seen?
Well, Quentin Flowers is the intriguing guy. You know, he played quarterback at the University of South Florida. The Bengals bring him in as a undrafted free agent to convert to running back, and he looked good in the OTAs in training camp. We'll see how things look when they put the pads on. But if he were to make the team, that gives you an intriguing weapon and a guy that could conceivably do some Wildcat-type stuff as an extra threat, playing some quarterback, some running back. He would have some special teams potential. So I guess he would be the wild card if I had to identify one of those other running backs who could potentially carve out a role on the 53.
All right, we'll keep an eye on him. Tight end, Tyler Eifert. It's all about staying healthy, right?
It is. The Bengals signed him to a 1-year deal as a free agent, and it is loaded with incentives if he can stay healthy. When healthy, he's one of the top 5 tight ends in the NFL. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, he's missed about 50% of the games in his NFL career. Having said that, I'm not sure that many folks around the NFL, at least in terms of fans, know the name Tyler Kroft, but he emerged as a pretty good weapon last year when Tyler Eifert was hurt. He had 7 touchdown catches, so he's a solid tight end. C.J. Uzama is also a decent weapon at tight end. So they're hoping, obviously, that Eifert can stay healthy because he's a tremendous weapon when he's on the field. But if not, they're still pretty solid there with Croft and Uzama.
By the way, when you were asking about whether any fans outside the area know who Tyler Croft, I was raising my hand since I'm a Rutgers fan. So that's
so
me.
You know.
I know, yes.
Tyler Croft can play, and he's really come a long way in a short period of time.
All right, wide receivers, wow. They have really built depth here at wide receiver behind A.J. Green. You got the veteran Brandon LaFell. And then it's going to be an all-out war for that spot, possibly, of course, eventually, maybe even as early as this year, and definitely next year, take over that role opposite A.J. Green. You got Boyd, you got Ross trying to come back after the injured season last year. You got Malone, you got Core, and you also have some intriguing rookies in Auden Tate and Devontae Boyd. So, they are stacked with talent and depth here, so it's good competition. Who do you like? Who are as far as all those young receivers, who are the ones that you think might offer the chance to actually contribute the most?
Well, I think it all depends on if John Ross can get healthy and stay healthy. He was the 9th pick in the draft last year after setting the 40-yard dash record at the NFL Scouting Combine, 4.22, so he can fly. But he's not a track guy. He was a football player at Washington. He did all sorts of things on the field. He was a tremendous weapon for the Huskies, but he only played 17 snaps in his rookie year with the Bengals and did not have a catch. So he was healthy in the OTAs. He was healthy in the minicamp. Let's see what he can do when they put on the pads. But if you can take a guy like that, keep him healthy, and line him up with A.J. Green and with Tyler Boyd and some of the other targets that we've mentioned, the Bengals offense has as many skill position players as any team in the NFL. They need play from the offensive line, and they've got to get some healthy play out of John Ross and Tyler Eifert. But if the line is okay and those two guys are healthy, look out.
All right, let's flip over to defense, and we'll start with the new defensive coordinator. Terrell Austin comes over from Detroit. He was there for the past 4 years. How is that going to be any different? Marvin Lewis, not only the head coach, of course, he's got that defensive mind, so we know he's always going to have a major input on the defense. But talk about what Terrell Austin brings to the Bengals defense.
Well, this is what they want him to bring, takeaways. Last year, the Bengals were next to last in the NFL in turnovers forced. They only had 14 all season long. Only the Cleveland Browns defense had fewer takeaways. The Lions, on the other hand, with Austin as their defensive coordinator, had 32, third best in the NFL. So that's what they are hoping. The former defensive coordinator, Paul Guenther, who went with John Gruden to the Raiders, was the type of defensive coordinator who stressed simplicity. He wanted the guys to have a simple concept that they could play fast. And by and large, it worked pretty well. The Bengals were typically among the leaders in the NFL in fewest points allowed, and Paul Guenther would say, that's all that matters. I don't care if I'm giving up a bunch of yards. As long as I keep the other team off the scoreboard, that's what they're paying me to do. And, for the most part, that's true. But we also know that the number one statistic in football that correlates to winning is turnover margin.
Sure.
And it was not good in Cincinnati last year. So they're hoping that Terrell Austin, with his style of football, can allow the defense to take the ball away more often. And if so, that should produce more wins.
All right, let's take a look at personnel on the defensive line. You've got the usual suspects, Geno Atkins, Carlos Dunlap, Michael Johnson. And then you've got some new faces, too. Ryan Glasgow came in last year. You have Jordan Willis coming in last year. You have Sam Hubbard this year, Andrew Brown. And you've got also Chris Baker as a free agent. And the kid Roland Jones is an intriguing prospect. So, and, of course, you also have Billings there as the nose tackle. Talk about the depth now up front, which is very important considering Johnson, Dunlap, and Atkins will be free agents after the year.
Well, Greg, you covered a lot of names there, but you missed one key guy, Carl Lawson.
Okay,
Carl
he's moving
Lawson.
over to defense. I mean, the defensive line. Okay.
Yeah, he was listed at linebacker last year, but he strictly played defensive end.
Okay.
And that was his position at Auburn. And he was one of the best young pass rushers in the NFL last year, and he's just going to get better. He is a freak athlete, a little bit undersized on the defensive line, but kind of in the mode of some guys we've seen in the past that are pass rush specialists. He's not going to stop the run on first down, but when the opponent gets into an obvious passing situation, number 58, Carl Lawson, is going to line up as the right defensive end, and he is going to terrorize quarterbacks.
Right.
So when you take Carlos Dunlap on one side, Geno Atkins coming up the middle, and Carl Lawson coming from the other side, that's about as good a pass rush as any team in the NFL has. Now they're trying to get another guy that can line up next to Geno Atkins on the inside, and they're hoping that Chris Baker can be that guy. He was a bust as a free agent last year in Tampa Bay when he got a big 3-year deal. But before that, the previous 2 years, he had been one of the better defensive tackles in the NFL for the Redskins. So having flopped in Tampa Bay, he signed a 1-year deal with Cincinnati. He would like to earn another contract by playing well this year. So we'll see if that's the way it plays out.
As far as the guy that really intrigues me is Andrew Brown. I mean, he really took off last year at Virginia when they changed their scheme over to a 4-3 defense, and sometimes that happens. We know that. He was a big-time prospect out of high school and really distinguished himself last year with the Cavs. I'm going to keep my eye on him.
And you should. The interesting thing about Andrew Brown, you mentioned that coming out of high school, he was a highly touted prospect. Number one defensive line prospect coming out of high school, went to Virginia, and mostly played defensive end in his career for the Cavaliers. Then he went to the Senior Bowl. They lined him up at defensive tackle, and nobody could block him. He had one of the best weeks at the Senior Bowl of anybody in the draft. So the Bengals will be playing him largely at defensive tackle, and we'll see if that's the sweet spot for him, because if he's the guy that winds up lining up next to Geno Atkins and can give the Bengals great production from two defensive tackle spots, we'll now combine that with Carlos Dunlap and Carl Lawson and Sam Hubbard, the third-round draft pick out of Ohio State. You might really have something.
Oh, yeah. There's a ton of talent up there, and that's what you want on your 4-3 front defenses. Still, the linebacking unit could use some more talent there, and I know they've done their due diligence as far as bringing in guys, a lot of young guys last year, and now Malik Jefferson comes in, and he's got a ton of talent. You never know when Burfict's going to play or not. So Jefferson might be the key to the linebacking, especially to the outside unit. And Preston Brown comes in as a free agent in the middle. I also think picking up Chris Wormley as a rookie free agent is a steal. So a lot of new young kids over the last couple of years throwing in a free agent. And, of course, you got Burfict, and I like the depth here as well.
Well, Preston Brown was a key signing for the Bengals. That was their most significant free agent addition. He led the NFL in tackles last year with the Buffalo Bills. And the great thing about Preston Brown is he doesn't come off the field. That's how you lead the NFL in tackles. But he plays on every down. A great run stopper, an okay pass defender. But he gives the Bengals a solid middle linebacker, which they haven't had in a few years. He replaces Kevin Minter in that role. Kevin Minter, I think, is, he's kind of reached the back nine of his NFL career, whereas Preston Brown is still in his prime. Vontaze Burfict is going to be suspended for the first 4 games of the season, so they're set with Preston Brown in the middle. Nick Vigil lines up on the outside on one side, and then on the other side, it'll be a bit of a question mark. It could be Vincent Ray, who's done a solid job off the bench as a veteran. Jordan Evans, who had a nice rookie year and played well at the end of the year last year, or the draft pick you mentioned, Malik Jefferson. One of those guys is going to have to be on the field in Burfict's place for the first 4 weeks. If I had to take a guess, I would say it would be Vinny Ray, but we'll see.
All right, now let's end up as far as the normal units here in the secondary, and you've got Kirkpatrick, you have William Jackson, Denard. That is a very fine top 3. Adam Jones is no longer around. And then you added a couple of rookies in the draft in Harris and Phillips. So we'll start at corner first of all. This looks like it's shaping up to be a pretty good unit. What do they got to do to be better than last year?
Well, let's start with Will Jackson. Will Jackson was their first-round draft pick 2 years ago out of the University of Houston. Missed his entire rookie year due to injury, and then last year established himself as a future star. I think he will be a Pro Bowler, if not this year, then certainly in the next year or two. He was statistically as good as any cornerback in the NFL when he was on the field last year. So remember that name, Will Jackson. Darqueze Dennard, another former first-round draft pick, has had a lot of injury problems in his NFL career, but he stayed healthy last year, turned out to be an excellent slot corner. This is the final year of his contract, so he's playing for a new contract, and when that's the case, you often get a guy's best production. So I would expect him to have a good year. Trey Kirkpatrick has been up and down. I think he's proven to be a NFL cornerback. He's had his moments where he's looked like a star. He's had others where he's struggled. But if he's your third-best cornerback, you're pretty good at that position. And then the two guys they drafted in the 5th round, Devontae Harris and Darius Phillips, I think they go to camp battling it out, and whichever of the two plays the best probably moves into the fourth cornerback role.
All right, and at safety, Williams and Ioka, I mean, those guys have been a staple there for several seasons, solid players. But then you also take a look at Clayton Fedulum, who is a big-time special teams player. He played a little bit last year. And also Josh Shaw, who can play both corner and safety, so he's in the mix. And then second-round draft pick for Jesse Bates. So what's the word on Bates as far as a second-round pick?
Well, they're looking for a safety that can take the ball away. And George Iloka and Sean Williams have both been big hitters, good run stoppers, but neither one has come up with a lot of interceptions in their NFL career. Jesse Bates had 6 in the 2 years that he played at Wake Forest. He's a former star baseball player, center fielder with the ability to track the ball, and that's why they drafted him. They want a center fielder type safety that can go get the ball when it's in the air. So we'll see. I don't know if Jesse Bates is going to take anybody's starting job right off the bat.
Sure.
I can almost guarantee he'll get a lot of snaps in the secondary, and it's not out of the question that by the end of the year, he could displace George Iloka or Sean Williams in the starting lineup if he's playing well.
And then the kicking game looks like they're back. Bullock and Huber. Alex Erickson, does he remain as the primary kick returner? Is that all about his job security? And if not, is there anybody that's going to try to push him off the roster?
Well, we mentioned the name Darius Phillips, who is a cornerback drafted out of Western Michigan in the 5th round. He had 5 kick return touchdowns and a punt return touchdown in his college career.
Yeah.
So he would be a guy to get a shot. John Ross, obviously, with his speed, he was a kick returner at Washington. If he's healthy, he could get a shot. So Alex Erickson has done a very good job as an undrafted college free agent out of Wisconsin a couple of years ago. Was one of the best kick returners in the NFL as a rookie. Not quite as good last year, but he's the incumbent, but he will definitely be battling for his job in training camp.
Dan, as I said at the open, and I've said it just about in almost a lot of positions, and you can go running back, you can go wide receiver, even offensive line's got more depth, defensive line, linebacker, DBs, boy, and again, that's why we mentioned Tobin. There is more depth on this team than I think I've seen in all the other teams that I've been previewing the training camp so far. And that's supposed to bring out the best in every player. And if Andy Dalton has a good season, watch out. This could be a really nice season for the Bengals.
Greg, I agree with you, but it all comes down to the play of the offensive line. They've got to be better up front than they did the last 2 years. And while we talked about some of the changes they've made, Cordy Glenn has to stay healthy. He missed 15 games over the last 2 years of the Buffalo Bills, so he's got to stay healthy at left tackle.
Oh, yeah.
Billy Price has to play well as a rookie at center because they're handing him the job on day one, and they've got to resolve those battles at right guard, at right tackle. But if they can do that under Frank Pollock coaching them up front, if the offensive line is good, the Bengals will be very good.
Dan, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for taking your time to talk to us today and educate us on the Cincinnati Bengals before training camp, and we hope to get an opportunity to talk to you during the season.
Who day to that, Greg? Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Dan. All right, that's Dan Horde. And once again, by the way, Dan, Syracuse grad. So I didn't have time on this show because he's given us more than enough time. But we'll talk about Syracuse with him, if I'm even saying it right. I know guys that went to Syracuse have a certain way. It's like Nollins. Those are the two Those are the two football teams that I always have to wonder. Am I saying it right? Syracuse, New Orleans. It's not New Orleans. I know it's not. But anyway, Dan has been the voice of the Bengals since 2011. He's done minor league baseball work. He's done other work with the Reds, the Red Sox, college football with Cincinnati Bearcats. So Dan Hoard, in the prime of his career right now, is the voice of the Cincinnati Bengals, one of 32 in the NFL. You gotta love that if you're in that position. All right, so anyway, thanks to Dan for joining us here to talk Cincinnati Bengals football. Later on today, we're going to talk Oakland Raiders football with Jeff Smith, Raiders analyst for 247 Sports and CBS Interactive. Don't forget to order the Ourlads NFL Draft Review Guide right here at ourlads.com. Follow us on Twitter at PrimeSN. That's when we'll let you know when every show and interview is available on demand. And thanks for listening to this edition of the OFN Meeting Room with Greg DePalma on the Ourlads Football Radio Network, where it's never too early to think about the start of the 2018 football season.